The only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
She was a devoted mother, a quiet fighter, and someone who never walked away from responsibility. But on May 20th, 2018, Nancy Troche Garcia said she was heading to Mexico to see her sick mother and vanished without a trace. No border crossing, no flight records, no phone calls since. Only a 6-month-old baby left behind, and a chilling silence that's lasted more than 6 years. Her family says she would never abandon her child, that something happened that day. And now, new technology, new voices, and new eyes are on the case.
Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Find Me Project and podcast. My name is Mark. I'm your host and moderator. Today's an exciting opportunity because it is Case Activation Day, a day where you can use your skill set for the greater good in helping us find a missing person. Now, as we go through today's briefing, I'm going to pull open a few different screens and I'll be sharing those. So if you're watching any of our short videos, you'll be able to see some of the content that I'm going to be sharing. If you're only listening to our podcast, that's completely okay. I'm going to be sure to explain everything in detail. Just as a reminder, our podcast is where we share the most information about the missing person cases that we work. So our next missing person case brings us to Asheboro, North Carolina, where we are looking for Nancy Garcia. Nancy disappeared back in 2018 when she was just 28 years old. Her current age is 35. Now, I want to go through a few different details with Nancy's personal information. Her race is Hispanic Latino. She has black hair, and her height is estimated to be somewhere between 4'11 and 5'2, and her weight is estimated to be between 90 and 125 pounds. Now, Nancy does have a tattoo, a small tattoo, I should say, believed to be on Nancy's right hand on her ring finger. Now, the interesting thing here with Nancy's case is that she also disappeared with her vehicle, a burgundy 2001 Chevy Impala with North Carolina license plates Delta Foxtrot Delta 2191. So as we go through this case and the next 2 weeks, it's important to gather as much information and intelligence as we can about Nancy's vehicle. Again, if you're watching any of our short videos, I am currently sharing an example of what that burgundy 2001 Chevy Impala looks like. Now, to get us started, I'd like to start with a prayer. This is something that I am relatively new to. And when I say something, I'm talking about faith. But, we started doing a prayer at the very beginning of our Find Me Project case activations, and it feels right. It certainly sounds right. So I feel like we absolutely need to keep this going. So let's go ahead and start with a prayer, and then we're going to jump right into today's case activation. Lord, today I raise Nancy's name up to you. I ask that you help give strength to her family, courage to the searchers, help us sharpen our eyes, and most importantly, serve as a beacon of light for those that are traversing their darkest hours.
A mission with purpose to find the missing using the power of social networking and cutting-edge technology. We're military veterans, technologists, scuba divers, and relentless seekers. From deep forests to sunken vehicles, from silence to signal, every clue matters. If you've ever felt the call to stand for something greater, this is your moment. This is the Find Me Project.
With so much uncertainty surrounding her disappearance, the case was brought to the Find Me Project in hopes of introducing resources this investigation may have never seen before. Behavioral and forensic profilers, intelligence experts, targeters trained to track the untrackable, all working together with one mission to bring answers and hopefully resolution to Nancy's family and to law enforcement.
Nancy Garcia was born in Mexico, one of 5 siblings. She moved to Asheboro, North Carolina, around 2012 with her fiancé, seeking a better life. Though the marriage was short-lived, Nancy stayed determined to rebuild. She later became a U.S. citizen, held a steady job, and lived independently in her own apartment. Those who knew her described Nancy as quiet, loyal, and deeply devoted to her family, especially her infant daughter, who had been born premature. She was known to still be breastfeeding and was reportedly attentive and loving, never the type to leave her child without reason or warning. On May 19th, 2018, Nancy attended a child's birthday party with her daughter. Friends at the event noted she seemed normal, grounded, and gave no indication that anything was wrong. May 20th, Nancy dropped off her 6-month-old baby at her ex-boyfriend's home in the 300 block of East Balfour Avenue. Nancy said she needed to go to Mexico because her mother was sick. She later stopped at his sister's residence, asking her to help care for the baby. That would be the last time anyone saw her. Monday through Wednesday of the following week, Nancy failed to report to work, prompting concern. A coworker contacted authorities requesting a welfare check. Officers visited Nancy's apartment but found no sign of her and no evidence of foul play. The apartment was undisturbed. When contacted, Nancy's family in Mexico stated that her mother was not sick and that Nancy had not told them she was returning home. They were unaware of any travel plans. Police interviewed her ex-boyfriend, his family, and several friends. No suspects were named and no arrests made. No physical evidence has emerged pointing to a clear direction. To this day, there are no confirmed sightings, no border crossings, no flight records, and no new clues regarding her whereabouts. Nancy's phone has gone silent, and her online presence ceased completely after May 20th, 2018. She left behind a daughter and a long list of unanswered questions. Nancy's Google account activity shows she used maps to route to a car dealership in Madison, North Carolina on the day she disappeared. Police found nothing suspicious at that dealership. In January 2019, her Google account was accessed near her mother's hometown in Mexico, roughly 30 miles away. That login might have been her, or someone else, but it gave a breadcrumb, and then the trail just vanished.
Wow, I have to say, just like we saw with our last missing person case featuring Gabe Crow, there's a lot of information that we can take a look at with Nancy's case. It's not an overwhelming amount of information, which is what you would hopefully see with a missing person case. Not always the case, though, but we have a good foundation to start. So as we look at this, there's a few different things that I want to take a look at and share with you. The very first one is what we call our overall media and awareness score. Whenever we receive a missing person case referral and we accept it, as we go through the initial activation process, that case information is run through our global search platform, which is our advanced AI system. And it looks to see what the case awareness and visibility truly is. So with Nancy Garcia's case, it received a 72%. That's moderate to high. A few different elements and categories that the system is looking at include national mainstream coverage, local regional news, specifically in the last 12 to 18 months. It looks at case databases and NGO references or non-government organizations. It reviews ongoing media and podcasts, law enforcement updates and records, social media community activity, as well as recency momentum. With Nancy's case, we saw a momentum surge in both 2024 and 2025, where there was updates around search operations as well as rewards. So 72% is fairly good. Now, there's a few different things that we can see right away that don't necessarily add up, right? One, Nancy had just given birth to a premature baby, and she was still breastfeeding. She had absolutely no reason to abandon her daughter. Also, there's no flight records, as well as no border crossing logs that Nancy crossed over from the United States into Mexico. And there's also no physical evidence of her vehicle traveling, which is very interesting, right? We live in a modern technology era. So both Nancy and her vehicle disappeared at the same exact time and have not been seen since. With a vehicle, it's a moving billboard in many cases, and it's going to go through all types of different license plate readers. One of the most common and largest is going to be toll readers, and there's been no reading whatsoever for Nancy's vehicle. Just like Nancy, it completely vanished. So, we find that very interesting. When we look specifically at U.S. Customs and Border Protection, whenever a person crosses from one country into the next, there are several different data elements that are captured as part of that process. Some of those include both date and time of crossing, the port of entry or exit, the vehicle that the person is driving or that they're riding in, any accompanying persons. So if they're not by themselves, it's also documented who is in that vehicle with the driver as they're crossing the border. And then also what type of identification documents were scanned. Now, also, according to law enforcement and the information that we have received, there's no flight records whatsoever. And that's important to understand, just as if she were to drive from the United States into Mexico, because the Department of Homeland Security would have records, specifically passenger manifest data. There would be TSA security footage. There would be ticket information. And when we take a look at the nearest airports that would be considered major hubs near where Nancy Garcia disappeared from, those would be Charlotte Douglas International Airport and Piedmont Triad International Airport in Greensboro. And we don't see any activity or recorded logs that Nancy was at either one of those locations. You would also typically see some type of credit card or bank transactions, whether she was purchasing a ticket, baggage fees, airport purchases, mobile payments, ride sharing apps. And, we don't have access to that data right now, but that's something that law enforcement would certainly have. And, over a period of time would likely share with the community to help drive the investigation. Also, when we look at not only our internal country databases here in America, Mexico also has their own immigration databases where they record any type of foreign nationals who are entering their country legally. So not only would we have a system of record if she crossed into Mexico, Mexico itself would have a record, and it appears that they don't, right? So those are some of the immediate concerns and pieces of information that simply just do not add up. Now, I'd like to pull open our missing person report that's been generated so far and talk about a few different data elements within this report. Just as a reminder, if you are part of our Guardian Angel Task Force, you can find this PDF report by navigating over to Nancy's case overview, and you'll be able to click on that and download it. If you're not part of our Guardian Angel Task Force, which is our team of volunteers who help search for missing people, certainly head over to our online platform. The link is in the show notes, and you can get access to all of this. What I want to pull open here first, though, is our geointelligence report looking at photo 1. So this is going to be a high-level view of where Nancy lived. There's 2 locations that are identified in this mapping overview. The location in red is going to be Nancy's last known residence, which was provided. And the location in orange is going to be the block where Nancy dropped off her baby girl at the ex-boyfriend's house. So when we look at the line of sight in the area, we find that there's moderate obstruction due to both residential spacing and foliage. when we look at mobility corridors, there's a few different ingress and egress vectors that we want to call out. Those are US 64, NC 42, and I 73 within a 2.5 to 7.5 kilometer radius. And the nearest major waterways are going to be Deep River and Muddy Creek. So there's going to be a potential for submersion and concealment at those locations. Now, the reason we bring that up is because when you have a missing person and a vehicle that disappear at the same exact time, there's often an overwhelming probability that that vehicle may be submerged in water. Very important to understand that we're not saying that is the case as of now, but that's something that we want to be mindful of as we move forward. And honestly, I'm going to say that there's a really good chance that both our sonar and dive team is going to be out in the area doing sonar scans at what we call AOIs, or areas of interest, looking to see if we can identify any type of object in the water. If we do, the team will assess it and likely scuba dive on it if it looks to be a vehicle. I also want to share the relationship mapping based upon the preliminary information that we have received so far. As intelligence is gathered and accepted, you're going to see this relationship mapping grow. So, once we get to part 2, you'll be able to see, just how important the intelligence gathering process really is. Each one of these circles represents a node, and the more data that is linked to a node is going to grow in size and importance, right? So that's something we're going to want to keep a very close eye on. I think right now, some of the areas that we really want to focus on would be Nancy's vehicle, any type of online or technology presence, really looking all across IoT, or the Internet of Things, to include the surface web, deep web, and dark web. I think that's going to be really important to help us map everything out. Now, if you are listening to our podcast, we're going to go ahead and share a behavioral and personality profile that our internal profilers completed that are part of our Guardian Angel task force. This is going to be a lot of information, and it's going to be valuable because it's going to help how you approach your intelligence gathering process. And then it's going to help our internal team if we go out and do a live search party. There's a few different parts to this. So, we're going to break that down in detail. So be sure to head on over to our podcast episode if you want to listen to that.
When our team was first referred this case, we also received a submitted voice message connected to the disappearance of Nancy Troche Garcia. For privacy and safety reasons, the individual's name and voice have been changed. The original message was spoken in Spanish. We've translated it into English so that you can hear exactly what was shared. Here is that message.
I'm sorry it's taken me this long to reach out. I put everything else aside for a while. I knew Nancy very well and was around her a lot in Randleman, North Carolina. Her disappearance was something that deeply affected all of us, and even today, we still have no answers. Nancy was a simple, honest, and hardworking woman. If there was one thing she truly loved in life, it was her daughter. I'm certain she would never have abandoned her, and in our last conversation, she made it clear she would never leave her with the child's father's family. I'm willing to help in any way you think I can with the work you're doing about Nancy's life. The only challenge is that my English is not very good, and I'm not sure if you speak Spanish, which is my first language. I hope we can talk more soon. I'd be happy to share anything I remember that might help.
All right, so something else that I want to show you is the back end to our advanced AI platform. And this is really where all of the bells and whistles and all of the cool things of our capability is located. What I'm going to share with you is our digital collectives. And they're essentially humanoids or digital bots. They are the consciousness to our advanced AI platform. And I'm going to have Alfred walk you through, based upon the preliminary information and the system's initial assessment some of the more critical open source intelligence flags that they believe will really help with Nancy's missing person case. Um, if you're not familiar with our process of gathering open source intelligence, when you become a member of our Guardian Angel task force and you register for a case, you submit flags, which are pieces of intelligence. Each flag has a point associated to it. Once that flag is submitted, it's reviewed both by our internal team as well as our uh, advanced platform. And if that flag is approved, it's immediately shared and factored in to any type of search parameters as we move forward. So this is part of our system being able to self-learn and adapt. You also receive the points for the flag, which really drives our overarching mission and purpose and places you on a leaderboard where we're going to have some really cool things moving forward. We're actually seeing one of those with this missing person case where at the end of the virtual search party, whatever team member is in first place is going to be given a reward. So, that's just a really cool way to drive our mission. But we have introduced a new digital collective, and he is Alfred. So I think you're going to enjoy this. So let's go ahead and queue up that review right now.
For the disappearance of Nancy Garcia, there are certain intelligence flags that can make all the difference. We're asking our Guardian Angel Task Force and OSINT volunteers to focus on high-value information sources. First, dating app profiles. If Nancy or anyone in her immediate network maintained an account, past or present, we need those usernames, photos, and any linked contact details. Second, contact information and relationships. That includes phone numbers, email addresses, and confirmed associates, personal, professional, or romantic. Third, vehicle-specific data. Nancy's 2001 Burgundy Chevrolet Impala with North Carolina plates DFD 2191 is a priority. Any sightings, registrations, parking records, or impound information could be critical. Fourth, public records and official filings. Property records, court documents, and licenses may reveal movement or connections. Fifth, social media content. Look for posts, tags, or images involving Nancy or close contacts, especially near the time of her disappearance. And finally, travel history. Any transportation bookings, border crossings, or location check-ins, digital or physical, are invaluable. Every piece of data builds the picture. Every flag moves us closer to answers. Your findings could be the breakthrough this case has been waiting for.
All right, so what we're going to do next is move into the behavioral and personality profile. This was conducted by some of the best profilers who are psychological, forensic, criminal profilers, intelligence professionals, basically people who are the very best at what they do and have spent a lifetime perfecting their skill set. Now, there's several different elements to this. One of the very first ones that we are most interested in is a personality assessment. Several different attributes that are being reviewed as part of this process, and you're going to hear those described as we move through talking about that. The first one that we want to talk about is Nancy's learning style. She had two specific primary learning styles, and those are both visual and movement based. And the team was able to determine that by looking at her occupational background information and also paired with her cultural tendencies. The secondary learning style is auditory. Now, Nancy had an estimated average to above average IQ. She's capable of managing interdependent living, immigration and citizen processes, and complex social networks across borders. Now, when we look at Nancy's cognitive strengths, she's able to display a relatively high level of practical problem solving, situational awareness, interpersonal relationship building. Now, one of her cognitive weaknesses is that she's vulnerable to deception or manipulation in intimate relationships, especially under emotional duress. Looking at her problem solving abilities, Nancy demonstrates resilience and adaptability, likely to employ pragmatic, resource based solutions over theoretical approaches. She has a moderate creative thinking capability, which is expressed more in personal solutions and adaptive thinking rather than abstract innovation. Her decision making skills trend towards emotional weighting when decisions involve family or relationships, likely to prioritize perceived loyalty and care over personal safety in some scenarios. Her empathy level is high. She's deeply committed to family and her child. She has a strong community and relationship bond. Now, her ability to recognize own and others' emotions is strong. It's been observed in maintaining close family connections and social network involvement. When we look at the ability to handle and control emotions, this is typically balanced, but stress and relationship conflict could trigger reactive or urgent decision making. Reviewing response to criticism and negative feedback, it's likely to internalize rather than openly confront with Nancy based on cultural norms and personal disposition that was reviewed. Her ability to express emotions appropriately in trusted circles is moderate, and it's believed that she's potentially reserved in unfamiliar or threatening environments. Now, when we look at her big five traits, the first one is openness, which is moderate. She values new experiences, but anchored to familiar people and routines. Her consciousness is high, and that's demonstrated in her work ethic and her parenting commitment. Her extroversion is moderate, social in trusted environments, but overtly outgoing with strangers, or I should say, not overtly outgoing with strangers. Her agreeableness is high. She's cooperative, empathetic, and willing to help. And her neuroticism, I likely pronounced that wrong, but I feel like I'm close, is perceived to be moderate, could experience anxiety or stress under relationship strains. A few other callouts here is when we look at her Myers-Briggs type indicator that has been identified as ISFJ, the nurturer. She's loyal, dependable, values tradition, and focuses on the needs of others, especially her family. Her strength is loyalty, resilience, adaptability, a high level of empathy, strong work ethic, and her weaknesses, potential trust in wrong individuals, emotional decision making under pressure. Her preferred social setting is small, familiar groups only, family centric gatherings, and trusted friends. It is believed that she is an ambivert, learning to introvert. The description behind this that our team was able to identify is that she has a balance between needing social interaction and private time with stronger comfort in known environments. So, an operational search note is that Nancy's high empathy and family centered decision making suggests she would not willingly vanish from her daughter without duress or manipulation. Behavioral indicators point toward possible coercion or deception by someone in her trusted inner circle. Her life patterns, cultural background, and personality profile support the hypothesis that if alive and displaced, she may be in a socially dependent arrangement, unable to freely communicate. Pardon me here when I get a drink. All right, so what I want to really focus on next is the profile that our internal team came up with. Now, it is very important to understand that this profile is solely based upon the preliminary information that we have received. It's also very important to understand that we do not deal with any type of missing person case that involves known or strong levels of perceived malicious intent, right? we leave that solely to law enforcement. That is their job and responsibility. So this profile is based on the current information that has been provided forward. So, you'll see as we navigate this profile, there's a few different viewpoints. But I think this is very important to understand as you go into the intelligence gathering process. So we want to get this out there to the public and the community. The first thing we want to talk about is Nancy's uncharacteristic deception. Nancy telling a lie about her mother's illness was completely out of the ordinary. By all accounts, Nancy was a truthful, reliable person. And for her to fabricate a story indicates she intentionally misled those around her that day. This suggests premeditation. Nancy knew that she needed an excuse to be away, and she didn't want anyone to know the real reason. This kind of behavior often means she either feared the truth would alarm her loved ones or feared someone else's reaction if her plans were known. It is a significant psychological clue because Nancy may have felt the need to hide her true destination or meeting, which could imply she anticipated some risk or knew that others would disapprove. Importantly, she cared enough to create a cover story, which is inconsistent with an impulsive act or mental breakdown. It looks more deliberate than organized. Now, Nancy's first priority that Sunday was apparently the safety and care of her baby. By leaving Natalia with her paternal family, Nancy ensured the infant would be cared for by people the baby already knew and trusted. This act is telling because it shows Nancy's maternal instinct was intact and strong, even as she herself was about to embark on something potentially dangerous or unknown. A profiling perspective noted that Nancy anticipated being unable to care for her child for at least a short while. Whether she expected to be gone for days or longer is unclear, but certainly she did not want to bring a vulnerable baby into whatever situation she was entering. This underscores that Nancy was thinking logically about her daughter's welfare. It also aligns with what her mother, Maria, and those close to her insist Nancy was a devoted mother who would never willingly abandon her child long term. The fact that she did leave the baby behind suggests that if Nancy had any choice in the matter, she intended to return or at least hope the child would be in good hands during her absence. This behavior is inconsistent with a mother thinking about this in advance, and thus leans toward either a short-term plan or in duress. Now, looking at her emotional state and stressors, at the time of her disappearance, Nancy was coping with multiple stress factors. She was a relatively new mother dealing with an infant. She had also recently broken up with the baby's father, meaning she was likely handling single parenthood and heartbreak simultaneously. Family and friends, however, did not observe outward signs of severe depression or erratic behavior. As noted, she seemed happy at the party the day before and maintained her weekly cheerful calls home. Still, from a profiling viewpoint, one must consider the possibility of postpartum depression or anxiety. Sometimes new mothers under great stress can hide their despair publicly. If Nancy was feeling overwhelmed or desperate, she might not have shared those feelings openly due to her reserved nature. There is no record of Nancy seeking mental help or expressing suicidal ideation, but the internal pressures could have influenced her decision making. Now, we also have to factor in cultural and familial ties. Nancy maintained strong ties to her family in Mexico and was described as family oriented. It would be extremely out of character for her to reach within 30 miles of her hometown and not contact her mother or siblings. This inconsistency is notable if Nancy willingly traveled back near her hometown. One would expect her to at least secretly let a sibling or someone know she was okay. The fact that she did not implies either she never actually made it there or she was in a situation where reaching out was impossible or dangerous. From a behavioral angle, if Nancy were free and in the right mind anywhere near home, her silence to her beloved family is deafening. This bolsters the idea that Nancy's disappearance likely involves coercion or harm. Now, Nancy's personality, responsible, quiet, non confrontational, and caring, suggests that she encountered conflict or threats. She might not readily seek help or confront the threat openly. A reserved personality might lead her to handle problems privately, which could explain why no friends knew of any plans to leave. If, for instance, she was being extorted or blackmailed, she might try to resolve it alone to avoid burdening others. Her cooperative nature might make her vulnerable to manipulation. If someone she trusted asked to meet urgently or promised help, she would be likely to comply. Profilers noted that Nancy does not fit the profile of someone who would stage a disappearance on a whim or live off the grid easily. She had no history of reckless behavior. Thus, any plan to vanish would probably have been driven by fear or self-sacrifice. Now, it is important to note that from our understanding, that let me think how I want to say this. The version or the accounts of Nancy visiting both the ex-boyfriend and the ex-boyfriend's sister and advising that she needed to go to Mexico to tend to her sick mother. These were accounts given by both of them, the ex-boyfriend and the ex-boyfriend's sister. We have not validated that information at all. Again, we're taking the information at face value and we're analyzing it. That has to be considered as we move forward, right? Considering all known evidence, I think investigators and profilers must grapple with several different theories about what happened to Nancy. The first option is that she had a voluntary disappearance or escape. One theory could be that Nancy chose to disappear on her own. Perhaps she felt overwhelmed by her life or was pursuing a fresh start. In this scenario, her actions on May 20th were part of a plan to secretly leave Asheboro, potentially to return to Mexico or go elsewhere without telling anyone. The evidence supporting this include the premeditation and the possible steps she took. For example, traveling to a car dealership could indicate she tried to sell or swap her car for cash, and the subsequent account login in Mexico might mean she successfully made it back to her home. Now, the second option is foul play involving a known person. We're not going to go into detail with that because, again, we don't deal with malicious missing person cases. We're only focused on finding the missing person. We don't care what happened to them or who was involved. We simply just want to know where Nancy is. So if you are listening to this and you have any information that you want to share, you can travel on over to our online platform and submit a tip. You have the choice to remain 100% anonymous or self-identify. That's completely up to you, but any information really does help, because similar to what we just identified with the second option, the third is that a stranger abducted her or she was involved in human or sex trafficking. I think with this case, it is certainly less common, but this is something that needs to be front of mind and reviewed as Nancy's missing person case is, reviewed in detail as well. And then the last one involves an accident, right? Maybe she was traveling somewhere and had any type of accident, and that is how she ended up along with her vehicle in a body of water, or she's in a field, which I just don't think that's as probable because of the time period that has elapsed. But it's certainly possible that both her and her vehicle could be submerged in water. And that's why, I feel very confident that we need to really focus on that. Along with an accident, It's also very much possible that we could be looking at self harm. And I don't want to talk in detail about that now because we don't have any information whatsoever that would suggest that, right? But as we move forward, if information comes to light, then we're going to very carefully identify that because I think it's important for that information, um, to become front and center. Now, when I look at the Google account login from Mexico, this is really interesting. And I think we really need to understand what the current technology capability and permissions were at the time, right? So, my background is currently as an engineer. So, I have a lot of experience in the cyberspace. So, this is something I can comfortably and confidently speak to, but I also had the opportunity to review this with some additional leaders in technology that are on our internal Guardian Angel task force. So, this is not just my thoughts. This is kind of the collective thoughts of our team. But it's important to understand how Google pinpoints a location, right? Google determines a login location from really three main signals. The first one is IP address geolocation, which is the primary method. It uses the internet service provider's registered location. The second is by using Wi Fi network scanning. So if the device is using Wi Fi, Google can cross reference the router's MAC address with its location database. And then the third is GPS data, where if the location services are enabled on the device at the time, that's how that GPS data would be captured. Now, when we look at the shack level accuracy versus reality, if it was GPS enabled, Google could get within a few meters, close enough to pinpoint a shack on a property. If it was Wi Fi based, accuracy could be 10 to 50 meters, depending on the density of Wi Fi networks in the area. In rural Mexico, this could be far less precise. And then if it was IP based only, no GPS or Wi Fi, accuracy could degrade to 1 to 5 kilometers or more, sometimes only pinpointing the nearest town, not the exact building. So, factors that could reduce accuracy would be use of a shared public Wi Fi hotspot. An example would be at a market or a store. Use of mobile network where the IP reflects the cell tower's location, not the device. In a rural area where Wi Fi access points are sparse. And then use of a VPN or proxy, which could put the location miles away from the actual login point. When we look at Google's data reality back in 2018, a logged in smartphone with location enabled would provide shack level accuracy within a few meters. A laptop or public computer, likely IP based, with a radius of hundreds of meters to kilometers, and a shared device in a rural area could be several kilometers off. Um, so, something else that we can. So, when I think about Google login security circa 2019, Google offered optional two-step verification, known as 2SV at the time, where users could choose to activate it, but the default setup did not enforce it automatically. If 2SV was enabled, successful login from a new device or location required both the password and a second factor. Options were SMS codes, Google Authenticator, push notifications, or hardware security keys. Users could mark a device as trusted, enabling later access from those same devices without the second factor. If I recall correctly, there was an option for what was known as Advanced Protection Program, or APP, and this was really a high security setup largely used by high-profile individuals requiring hardware security keys. So I just don't see that being the case here for Nancy Garcia. Default practices, though, as of 2021, Google began nudging users toward enabling 2FA, which is two-factor authentication. But in 2019, many accounts likely remained protected only by passwords. So while 2FA offered significant protection, users could still log in if the account was configured without it, or from a device location Google recognized as safe. So, if we ask the question, could Nancy have logged in herself? Potentially, the answer would be yes, if two conditions were met. The first, Nancy's Google account did not have 2SV enabled. And the second, the login attempt came from a trusted device, her phone, laptop, or other previously used device. In such a case, she would need only her password to log in, even from Mexico. Now, could someone else have accessed the account? The answer to that is yes, but under certain circumstances. So if 2SV was disabled, anyone with her email and password could log in from anywhere. This could happen if credentials were shared or compromised. If 2SV was enabled, but from a trusted device, a user logging in from that device would bypass the second factor, assuming they also had the password. However, a person logging in from an unfamiliar device or new location, like another country, would typically trigger a second factor prompt. So, when I think, what happens if someone logs in from a new country, like Mexico? If a user logs in from an unfamiliar device and a new location, especially a foreign country, that they do not have that location already marked as trusted, then Google would almost certainly trigger a security prompt. This could include a second factor authentication, a security alert email sent to the account's recovery email or device, or a temporary hold login verification asking the user to confirm the attempt. This is part of Google's risk-based authentication system, which evaluates whether the location is new or suspicious, whether the device is known, whether login behavior is consistent with the user's typical pattern, and whether the IP or location is associated with past attacks. So, would this prompt have been triggered in Nancy's case is a question I think we have to ask. And the answer to that would be most likely yes, unless one of the following exceptions applied. Exception 1 is that the device used in Mexico was previously marked as trusted. This would mean Nancy herself logged in on the exact device in the past, or someone had physical access to her device and logged in from Mexico using it. In this case, no second factor challenge would occur because Google recognizes the device. Exception 2 is that two-factor authentication was not enabled on her account. If Nancy didn't have 2FA set up, then the login would only require a correct username and password and would still be allowed even from Mexico. She would, however, receive a security alert about the new login location. And then, I think the final exception that we can identify is that her account recovery email or phone number had been compromised. So if someone gained access to her recovery method, they could bypass a 2FA challenge using account recovery processes. I think the most likely explanation based on known facts is, since there's no evidence Nancy had traveled to Mexico and her family confirmed she never planned to, the 2019 Mexico login raises serious questions. If 2FA was off and the person had her password, then the login is plausible, no prompt. If 2FA was on, the person likely had physical access to her trusted device. And if no trusted device was involved and two-factor authentication was on, then yes, a 2FA prompt would have been triggered and the login would be unlikely without additional access. So I think, the takeaway here is that unless the device used in Mexico was previously authorized by Nancy, and unless her account had no 2FA, the 2019 login would have generated a second factor prompt, making it unlikely to be a random third party without additional access.